Imagine you're sitting across from two people at a dinner party. The first person is a 34-year-old project manager living in Chicago. She makes $82,000 a year, which by most standards sounds pretty comfortable, right? She has a nice apartment, goes out on weekends, gets her nails done, takes a vacation or two a year. But here's the thing. She has $400 in her savings account. $400. She's one car repair away from putting it on a credit card that already has $6,000 on it. And every single month, no matter how hard she tries, her bank account basically resets to zero. Now picture the second person. He's a 38-year-old office worker in Osaka, Japan. He makes the equivalent of about $42,000 a year, literally half of what she makes. And yet, he has the equivalent of $110,000 sitting in savings and investments. He owns his car outright, he has no credit card debt, he sleeps well at night, he doesn't panic when something breaks. Same planet, same decade, half the salary. And yet one of them has real financial security and the other doesn't. How is that possible? What does this guy know that she doesn't? And more importantly, what do millions of ordinary Japanese workers know that most Americans are completely missing? My name is Nico, and I spend way too much time thinking about money. And today we are going down a deep, deep rabbit hole into one of the most fascinating money cultures on the entire planet. If you're new here, hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up because the algorithm loves that and it helps me make more videos like this one. And I want to ask you something before we start. When was the last time you actually felt in control of your money? Not just okay, not just getting by, but genuinely in control. Keep that question in your head because by the end of this video, I think the answer is going to look a lot different for you. Let me paint you a picture. Most of us think about money the same way we think about a treadmill. You get on, you run as fast as you can, and at the end of the day, you haven't actually gone anywhere. You're just tired. The faster you run, the faster the belt moves. And so the natural conclusion most people reach is that the answer is just running faster, making more money, getting that raise, landing that promotion. But here's where it gets really interesting. Japan completely blows that idea up. Because Japan shows us that it was never about the speed. It was about getting off the treadmill entirely. And the way they do it is not through some secret investment strategy or some advanced financial product most of us have never heard of. It's cultural. It's psychological. It runs so deep that it starts before you ever touch a single yen. So let's talk about the foundation. And I mean the absolute bedrock of how Japanese people approach money. Because once you understand this, everything else clicks into place. There's a concept in Japan called Kakeibo, and if you've heard of it, great, but most people have only heard the word without really understanding what it means at a psychological level. Kakeibo is a budgeting method, sure, but calling it a budgeting method is like calling the ocean a puddle. It's so much more than that. The word literally translates to household financial ledger, and it's been practiced in Japan for over 100 years. A journalist named Hani Motoko introduced it in 1904. Yes, 1904, and it has been passed down through generations of Japanese families ever since. Here's how it works. At the beginning of every month, you sit down with a physical notebook, not an app, not a spreadsheet, a real notebook with a pen, and you ask yourself 4 questions. How much money do I have coming in? How much money do I need to spend? How much money do I want to save? And how can I improve from last month? Those questions seem simple, almost embarrassingly simple. But here's the part that will blow your mind. The act of writing things down by hand activates the completely different part of your brain than typing does. There's actual neuroscience behind this. When you write by hand, you engage the encoding process more deeply, which means you retain information better and you process it more emotionally. You're not just logging data, you're forming a relationship with your money, and that changes everything. Compare that to how most Americans budget, which is to say most Americans don't budget at all. A recent survey found that nearly 75% of American households don't follow a monthly budget, 3/4. And the ones who say they do budget are often talking about checking their bank app after the damage is already done. That's not a budget, that's a highlight reel of your mistakes. Kakeibo flips the whole thing. You decide what happens to your money before the month starts, not after. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Kakeibo doesn't just track spending, it categorizes your spending into 4 buckets. Survival, the things you absolutely have to pay for. Optional, the things you want but don't need. Culture, experiences that enrich your life like books, concerts, education. And extra, the unexpected stuff, the stuff life throws at you. And at the end of every month, you reflect, not in a punishing, guilt spiral kind of way, but in a curious, almost scientific kind of way. What worked? What didn't? Why did I make that choice? What will I do differently? It builds what psychologists call metacognition, which is basically your brain's ability to think about its own thinking. And when you develop metacognition around money, you stop spending on autopilot. You start spending with intention. And that shift alone, intention versus autopilot, is worth more than any raise you could ever get. Now, let's layer something on top of this, because Japan's money wisdom goes way beyond any single tool or technique. There's a broader cultural attitude toward money in Japan that simply does not exist in America, and it starts with something called motenai. Motenai is a Buddhist concept that roughly translates to "what a waste," and it's this deep cultural grief about wasting anything: resources, food, time, money, objects. Japanese people have an almost visceral discomfort with waste. It's not a rule someone imposed on them. It's a feeling, it's identity. It's part of how they see themselves as people. And here's the crazy part. That feeling is economically enormous. Think about what drives the majority of American consumer spending. Marketing, the feeling that you're missing out, the idea that you need the new thing because the old thing is outdated. Americans are marinating in thousands of advertising messages every single day, and almost every single one of them is designed to make you feel like what you have isn't enough. Japan has advertising too, obviously, but the cultural resistance to wasteful spending is so deeply embedded that it creates a natural buffer against that pressure. When you feel genuine discomfort at wasting a half-eaten bowl of rice, you're probably not going to rush out and buy something you barely need. Now, let me give you the math that makes all of this viscerally real, because this is where my brain starts to short-circuit a little bit. Let's take our 2 people from the beginning, our Chicago project manager making $82,000 a year and our Osaka office worker making $42,000 a year. Let's say after taxes and basic cost of living, our Chicago woman has about $1,500 a month in discretionary spending, money she can technically do whatever she wants with. And let's say our Osaka worker has about $900 a month in discretionary spending after his costs. Significantly less, right? But here's where the identity shift starts. Because our Chicago woman, operating in a culture of consumption, lifestyle inflation, and social comparison, spends most of that $1,500. Maybe she saves $200 in a good month. On a bad month, which is most months, she saves nothing. Maybe less than nothing if the credit card comes into play. Our Osaka worker, with his Kakeibo notebook and his motenai mindset and his deeply ingrained savings culture, he saves about $450 of his $900 every single month. That's a 50% savings rate, which sounds insane, and Americans hear that and think that sounds miserable. But here's the thing, his quality of life is not miserable. He's not eating ramen on the floor, he's going out, he's enjoying his life, he's just genuinely intentional about it. So let's run the math. Our Chicago woman saves $200 a month. Over 10 years, with a modest 7% annual return in a basic index fund, she ends up with roughly $34,000. Our Osaka worker saves $450 a month. Same 10 years, same 7% return. He ends up with just under $78,000. And here's where the gap gets almost offensive. 20 years out, she has about $104,000. He has about $280,000 on half her salary. This isn't magic. This isn't insider trading. This is just the unstoppable mathematical force of compounding applied consistently, and the cultural mindset that makes consistency possible. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the Japanese don't just save more, they save differently. Japan has one of the highest household savings rates in the entire developed world. For decades, the Japanese personal savings rate hovered around 25 to 30% of disposable income. Even today, when it's dipped a bit, it's still significantly higher than the American savings rate, which bounces around in the 3 to 7% range in normal years. 3 to 7%. That means the average American family is essentially keeping nearly all of their money in circulation, spending it, losing it, letting it evaporate, and then wondering why they feel broke. Japan also has a beautiful tradition called the New Year's envelope, otoshidama, where adults give children money specifically designed to be saved and thought about. From the time Japanese children are in elementary school, many of them have their own child-sized Kakeibo. They're learning to track, to reflect, to intentionally allocate money before they ever have a real salary. Compare that to the average American kid who learns about money through watching their parents swipe a credit card and not really talk about it. We're not just dealing with different habits here. We're dealing with completely different programming, different financial operating systems installed in childhood. Now, I want to talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in these conversations, and that's the Japanese concept of ikigai and how it intersects with money. Most people have heard of ikigai as this beautiful framework for finding your purpose, the overlap between what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. But here's how it connects to money in a way most people miss. When Japanese workers find meaning in their work and their daily rituals, and Japan has an incredibly high rate of finding meaning in repetitive, skilled work, they're not using spending as a substitute for fulfillment. They're not shopping to feel something. They're not buying things to fill a void. And that distinction is worth, conservatively, thousands of dollars a year. This is the thing nobody tells you about American overspending. A huge chunk of it is not really about wanting things. It's about wanting to feel something. Wanting to feel successful. Wanting to feel like you're keeping up. Wanting to feel stimulated or excited or rewarded after a bad week. Retail therapy is literally a thing we joke about, but it's actually a very real and very expensive emotional coping mechanism. When your culture gives you other ways to feel satisfied and purposeful and connected, you spend less, not because you're disciplined, because you don't need it as much. Let me give you another angle on this because I think about this constantly. Japan has this concept of shokunin, which describes a craftsman or artisan who has devoted their life to mastering a single craft. A sushi chef who spent 20 years learning to make rice correctly before they ever touched a fish. A woodworker who has been perfecting joints for 30 years. And the interesting thing about shokunin culture is that it's completely anti-consumerist by nature. When you take deep pride in what you already do and what you already have, the desire to constantly acquire new things just diminishes. It's replaced by something more durable: mastery, stewardship, care. Think about the difference between someone who buys a cheap blender every 2 years because it breaks and they replace it, versus someone who buys one high-quality blender and maintains it for 15 years. Over a lifetime, the first person spends way more money. Japan tends toward the second person, not because they're cheap, but because they have a cultural appreciation for quality and longevity over novelty and volume. And here's the crazy part when you run those numbers. If the average American spends just $200 a month on things they buy impulsively, replace frequently, or discard without much thought, and that number is almost certainly conservative, that's $2,400 a year. Over 30 years at a 7% market return, that's not $72,000, it's $226,000, almost $250,000. evaporated, not through any single catastrophic financial decision, just the slow, quiet drain of buying things without thinking, replacing things without caring, spending without intention. Now let's talk about the social dimension, because this is where America and Japan truly diverge in a way that feels almost unfair. In America, there's this phrase, keeping up with the Joneses, and it's so embedded in our culture that we barely even notice it anymore. The bigger house, the newer car, the nicer vacation, the designer bag. There's this unspoken competition happening at every level of American society, where spending is a proxy for status, where what you buy tells people who you are. And that's financially catastrophic, because it means your spending decisions are being made by your ego, not your brain. You're not buying the car you need, you're buying the car your neighbor might notice in the driveway. Japan has status signaling too, don't get me wrong, but it shows up very differently. In Japan, excessive public displays of wealth are often considered embarrassing. There's a cultural concept called the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, and while it has its own social complications, one of its side effects is that nobody's really competing to look richer than they are. The social pressure actually runs in the opposite direction. Appearing to waste money or to live beyond your means is a source of social discomfort, not admiration. And when that's the cultural norm, saving money doesn't feel like deprivation, it feels like dignity.
Here's something I want you to sit with for a second. What if the reason you feel broke isn't because you don't make enough money, but because the culture you're swimming in is specifically designed to make you spend everything you make and then some? What if the system you're living inside was literally built to keep your bank account close to zero? Because that is, to a meaningful degree, what's happening. American consumer culture needs you to spend. The economy is built on consumption. Marketing budgets in this country run into the hundreds of billions of dollars every year, all of it pointed at one goal, getting you to part with your money. Japan has consumption too, obviously, but the cultural immune system against it is so much stronger. The tradition of saving runs so much deeper, and the social reward for financial prudence is so much more real. Now, I don't want this to turn into some romanticized fairy tale about Japan, because Japan has real financial challenges too. Their economy has struggled with stagnation for decades. They have a demographic crisis with an aging population and low birth rates that creates enormous pressure on their public finances. Housing in major Japanese cities like Tokyo is expensive. Young people in Japan face real financial stress. So this is not me saying everything about Japan is perfect and everything about America is broken. That would be lazy and it would be dishonest. What I'm saying is this: the specific cultural tools around saving, intentionality, anti-waste, and identity-based financial behavior that Japan has developed, those tools work. Those tools produce measurably better financial outcomes for average earners, and they're not dependent on having a higher salary. They're dependent on having a different relationship with money. And here's the liberating part of that. You can change your relationship with money right now, without a raise, without winning the lottery, without any change in your external circumstances at all.
So what would it actually look like to bring some of this into your life? Start with the Kakeibo practice. Get a physical notebook. Sit down on the first of the month and write down exactly what's coming in. Then write down what absolutely has to go out. Then decide, not discover, decide how much you're going to save before you spend a single dollar of what's left. Make that savings number non-negotiable. Transfer it the day you get paid. Don't decide to save what's left at the end of the month, because I promise you there won't be anything left. Pay yourself first and make peace with the fact that you'll adopt to whatever remains. Then think about where you can apply Motenai in your own life, not as a punishment, as a practice. What do you replace that could last longer if you took better care of it? What do you buy impulsively that you never really needed? What subscriptions are you paying for that you forgot you had? What are you spending on because of how it makes you look, rather than how it actually makes you feel? These are not rhetorical questions. Sit with them. Write the answers down. because the gap between your current financial life and the one you actually want often isn't as wide as you think. It just requires you to start seeing your spending clearly instead of just letting it happen to you. And here's the identity piece, and this is the one that I think matters more than any of the practical tactics. The Japanese people we're talking about aren't disciplined robots who white-knuckle their way through temptation every day. They're people who have internalized a different identity around money. They see themselves as people who save, as people who don't waste, as people for whom financial prudence is not a sacrifice, it's a value. And when something is a value, it doesn't require willpower. It just becomes what you do.
You become the kind of person who checks in with their money regularly. You become the kind of person who decides before they spend. You become the kind of person who gets genuinely uncomfortable wasting something. Time, food, money, potential. And once that identity shift happens, and it can happen, the habits follow automatically because you're not fighting yourself anymore. You're just being yourself. Here's where the compounding gets cosmic, because we talk a lot about financial compounding, the way money grows on itself over time. But there's another kind of compounding that doesn't get nearly enough credit: habit compounding. Every month you stick to your savings intention, it gets a little easier. Every time you choose not to buy something you don't need, your resistance to the next impulse purchase gets a little stronger. Every time you reflect on your money with curiosity instead of shame, your relationship with it gets a little healthier. And slowly, the way you talk to yourself about money changes. The way you feel about your future changes. And then, almost without noticing, you look up 5 years from now and you're not the person living paycheck to paycheck anymore. You're someone else. Someone who sleeps a little better, someone who has options, someone who, on half an income or less, has built something real.
So the next time someone tells you that the reason you're not building wealth is because you don't earn enough, I want you to think about that office worker in Osaka, Japan, making $42,000 a year, writing in his notebook at the start of every month, feeling zero shame about passing on the thing he doesn't need, building, quietly and consistently, a financial life that most Americans with twice his salary will never touch. The salary was never the whole story. It was always the system. And now you know what the system looks like. If this video made you think differently about your money, even slightly, do me a favor and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear this. And if you want to go deeper into the psychology of why we make the financial choices we make, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next one.